Hello magical hands and welcome to another sewing tutorial. If it's your first time here, hi, my name is Jessica, and in my previous video I uploaded the part 1, which is the pattern drafting of this tutorial. So if this is something you're interested in learning how to sew, make sure to keep on watching and let's get into the tutorial proper. So for my fabric, I have this Ankara piece of fabric here and I have exactly 6 yards here, but I'm going to be cutting out 3 yards to use for this tutorial. Definitely I still had some of the fabrics remaining, so I went ahead to put my pattern papers on the fabric and I'm going to be cutting all of them out. I'm going to be cutting all of them in different pieces. I will not be cutting any of them on the fold, and I just made sure to add 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So you see the side pieces, I did not add any allowance because I'd already added my 1 inch sewing allowance on the pattern paper. So if you've not watched how to draft the patterns, it will be linked right there in the description box, and if you're watching this on download, you definitely have to put on your data so you can have access to the part 1. That's if you have not seen that yet. So I'll just go ahead and start cutting this out. Now I'll go ahead and I'll cut the collar. You see that part right there? I'm going to cut that side of the collar on fold, and I'll cut 2 pieces for the collar. One will serve as the main fabric and the other will serve as the lining, and I'll make sure to add 1/2 inch all around while I'm cutting this out. Now we are going to transfer the patterns for the sleeve to the fabric. So I've already added my sewing allowance to the fabric, and like I mentioned in the part 1, if you don't want yours to be fitted, you can go ahead and add up your ease allowance, but I'm not adding to mine because I want this to have like a fitted look. So I'll just go ahead and transfer it as seen to the fabric. Also make sure to cut out 2 pieces for your sleeve. So now I'm going to keep the back pieces. I'll keep the sleeve and the collar aside, and I'll start working on the front piece. So if I want to cut out the lining piece of this, I have to consider the fact that the lapel will be folded, and if it's folded, it means my lining face is going to be the face that will be visible out there. So I'll have to cut that center front lining with both the lining material and with both this Ankara piece here, so that by the time I fold it, I will have the Ankara piece showing at that point. So for the center front pattern, I will start cutting along that bottom band up to that lapel line that is marked very visibly there. So the whole of that part there, I'm going to transfer it to an Ankara piece, and then the other part of the CF of the center front, I'll transfer it to a regular lining piece. So this is all the lining pieces for my front piece. I have the center front that I divided into 2. I used one part to cut the Ankara piece and the other part to cut out the lining. So now I'll just go ahead and I'll join them together. When I was cutting it out, I added my sewing allowance all around. So I'll just go ahead and join it together so it can be accurate with the main piece. Also, when you are done sewing each of the lining pieces, make sure that it is equal with the main piece. Just place them on each other so it's equal. That way you know that you're working with exact measurements. So now we'll join the side front to the center front, but I'm going to be adding some paper stay to it for some hold. I did not have much, so I did not add to all the pieces. I just added to the ones that I could add. So I tried as much as possible to add the paper stay to mostly my side pieces, that's the side front and the side back. Just because I didn't have enough left, I would have added to all the lining pieces. So we can now join the side front of the lining to the center front of the lining, so it can give us a complete blouse, which should look like this. Now that I'm done sewing that, I'm going to notch along the curved area so that it relaxes properly, and then I'm going to iron this out. By the time I'm done ironing it out, I'm going to go ahead and I'll sew up the main piece same way we sewed up this lining piece. After sewing up the main piece, I'm going to stick notch around the curved part and I'm going to iron it out as well. At this point, you want to make sure that your lining piece and your main piece are equal. Just make sure that no one is longer or shorter than the other. Just make sure that everything is equal. Now we'll keep the front piece aside and move to the back piece. For the back piece, we have the center back and then we have the side back. First of all, we are going to transfer them to the fabric, and you're going to try to make sure that it is equal with the main piece. Make sure no one is longer than the other or shorter than the other. After transferring it to the lining, I'm going to sew up that area of the back piece just as seen. So as we already know, after sewing you have to iron it out. This is the back piece. I also did the same thing to the lining piece. I also tried to add paper stitch to the side piece of the back piece, but if you notice, I only added to one side, and that's because that was like the last remaining. I didn't have enough to add to the other side. So now I'm going to close up the back piece and I'm going to place them on each other, right face facing each other, and I'll sew up that center back line just as seen. I'll do same thing to the main piece as well. Now this is what we have here. I'm going to now join the back piece to the front piece, the lining pieces, only the lining pieces. So I'll bring my front lining and I'll place it right here. Just make sure that your back lining is equal with the main fabric of the back lining. So I'll sew up the side seams of my lining piece and I'll sew up the allowance that I added, and also the shoulder line. I'll sew them together. Afterwards, this is what everything looks like. Next, we are going to attach the collar to this. Remember when we were cutting the collar, we cut two pieces for the collar, and I said one will serve as the lining piece and the other will serve as the main piece. The reason why one is serving as the lining piece is because when we are done, we are going to fold down the collar, and when you fold down the collar, you do not want a black lining to be showing. So definitely we are going to use an Ankara or your main piece as the lining for the collar. So we are going to bring the collar piece right here. You see this most curved part, that is the part that will be sewn to the neckline of the lining piece. So that midpoint there, I will just give it a little notch so that I can pin it to the center back. Remember, the center back is already sewn, so we can pin it together and everything will be accurate. Over to sewing it together, you are going to make sure that as you are sewing the collar, you're only sewing up the allowance that you added while you were cutting it out, which should be 1/2 inch. And then as you're sewing, make sure to start sewing from the midpoint to one other side. When you finish one side, then you can come back and start sewing from the midpoint to the other side. So you are going to sew and stop where the notch is. Remember, we notched the collar when we're drafting the pattern, so you sew and stop at that notch. And this is what it looks like. So by the time we sew up the 1/2 inch that's around that area, to join this to the main piece, you will see this is how more defined it's going to be. Now we'll continue sewing from the midpoint to the other side of the collar as well. So this is the back pieces of the main piece. We are going to place them on each other and we are going to sew up that center part of the back piece, which is exactly what we already did with the lining piece. So this is what it looks like. Now I'll place the front piece on it just as seen, and I'm basically just going to sew up the sides together, and then I'll also sew up the shoulder together so that I can have the main piece formed same way we formed the lining. So this is what it looks like after I'm done sewing. Now I'll bring in my collar, which is the supposed main piece of the collar, and I'm also going to notch it at that point and sew it up to the main piece same way we did with the lining. So after sewing the collar, this is what we have right here. At this point you can iron if you want. So the next step I want to do will be to attaching my sleeve. So at this point here, the sleeve, the armhole area was tight, so I had to trim the sleeve area before I attached the sleeve because it was not matching with the sleeve again. I don't know if it's because I added my bust measurement to my sleeve, it became a bit tighter. So next we are going to cut the lining for the sleeves. And then we are going to sew up the sleeves separately. Make sure to sew up the sewing allowance that you added. So I've already sewn the lining of the sleeve and I'm going to attach it to the lining of the blouse. Okay, so I'll just go and sew them up together. So like I mentioned earlier, the armhole of the body became bigger than the sleeve, so what I did was to just trim it down so it becomes equal with the sleeve, and then I will join them together. So this is what it looks like after I've joined the sleeve. You will see that the lining piece is beginning to look more like the blazer we're making. So we'll go ahead and repeat the same process to the main piece as well. So I'll bring the sleeve for the main piece and I'll attach it to the blouse again also. And I'll also trim the main piece because we already trimmed the lining piece. You want everything to be equal. So after trimming it, I'm going to join my sleeve. This is what joining my sleeve looks like. You'll see that at the end of the day, everything became equal. So this is what my prepped piece looks like. I'm now going to bring the lining piece. I'm going to place them right face facing each other. I know that my main Ankara face does not have a difference between good and the wrong face, I know, but just place them right face facing each other. You should know your good face based on the fact that you've already sewn on the wrong face. So place them right face facing each other. Just ignore the sleeves for now. We'll come back to the sleeve again, and you're going to start pinning, starting from that notch collar where we have the notch there. You will pin both of the collars together. So the next place I'm going to pin together will be the edge, and once I pin down the edge, I'm going to start pinning the side seams and the center back together. So this is where you will know that all your pieces are equal. When you pin the edge together, your side seam for your lining and your main piece is supposed to be aligned, and then the center back of your lining and your main piece will also align. If it does not align, then something is wrong somewhere. You should check before you join it together. So mine did align, so I just went ahead to secure it down with these pins just as seen. Yes, you can see closely how they align by the sides there. So also the next part you want to probably pin will be like the center of the collar, so that everything is in place. So this is also a proof that your pieces are equally placed. This is the center back. I don't know if you guys can see it closely, but you see that they actually align together. So now I'll start sewing from one side, just as seen. I'll just take my time to show you guys, and I'm only going to be sewing half an inch all around, or quarter of an inch, whatever it is you added. I'm going to sew through to the collar area. I'll come back down to this edge here. I'm going to sew, and I will sew and stop right there. So I'm going to leave this area here. I'm not going to sew that part. I'm going to use that part to do all my remaining work and all of that. So this is what the whole sewing process looked like. Just a quick view of what it looks like in case you don't know what sewing looks like. So this is just a closer view of how to sew the notch area. You are going to make sure that when you get to that midpoint there, that notch area, you will leave your needle inside, flip, raise your presser foot and flip over. So by the time we are done sewing the notch collar, we'll still come and notch that part, as the name implies. You'll still come and make a little cut at that V area there, so that when we flip this over, it's going to relax flat. Yeah, so just go ahead and continue sewing. So this is what it looks like, and I'm going to notch all around it so that I can have a more relaxed fabric by the time I flip this over to the right face. And also notch the notch collar area that I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to flip everything over right here, and I'm going to flip it through that space that I created there. So after I flip everything over, I'm going to still work on the sleeves before I close up that last part. So at this point, I had tried it on to see the process so far. I had not ironed yet, but trust me, everything was coming together. And also, I was already editing the part 1, which was the pattern drafting, which you guys already saw, of which I also wanted to upload this very day too as well, and it has been like 2 weeks since I last uploaded. So I decided to use this video right here at the beginning because I am trying to be using only my content, like only my picture, original picture. I can show you guys the inspo and all of that, but I want to be making sure that I'm using only my pictures for the thumbnail. And someone had to comment that the clothes did not fit and I should try again. I'm pretty sure some of you already saw the comments. I wish I had not even deleted it because right now I really want to put the comments on the screen. and it feels like an advice, but it's total trash when you come to tell someone that is trying to not just make content but also impact someone's, because I know one or two people are going to learn a few things from these tutorials here. Even if you're not making the whole dress, you probably must have learned a new tip or a new trick. And it's not like you've even seen the part 2, but you have everything to do. You have like every advice to give. I always feel like if you know so much, you wouldn't be roaming the streets of YouTube. I didn't know I'll be talking about this, but this is to just let you guys know that sometimes you have to calm down before you write down a comment. And just in case you guys think we are not seeing all those comments, we are seeing every single thing. So let's get into the tutorial proper. So now I'm going to pass my hand through that opening that I have there, and I'm going to bring the sleeve outside. That is both the main piece and the lining piece of the sleeve. I'll bring both of them outside. So I'm going to place them up closely just as seen, and I'm going to sew all around. I'll just show you guys closely. I really can't explain this part with words because I feel like my words will fail me, but this is what it looks like right here. I also repeated the same thing to the second sleeve. So now I'm going to push everything back from that space that we have at the base right there. So this next part here is going to be another simple tip or hack on how to close up a seam, and this is where we get to wonder, how were we able to sew everything up without having any of the sewing lines? This way you don't even have to weave. So I'm just going to be showing you guys this stitch closely. You are going to first of all try and pass it from inside out so that the tied mouth of the thread is like hidden inside. So just this is how you do it. Just pass your thread in like this. I think my words are still going to fail me, but you guys watch the video for yourself. So this is how you're going to continue, and as you are doing, you don't even have to pull the thread very tight. Once you get to a certain point, you can now pull the thread. Once you pull the thread, you see that every single thing starts closing up. Basically, this type of stitch works very well with jeans, but it's also good with this. But the main thing is, once you are done, make sure to iron it flat, because if you don't iron it, it's going to be very noticeable that a little bit of work was done there. Once you iron it, nothing is going to show. So yes. So just in case you have the impression that closing up the seam was the last part, no. Ironing is definitely the last part. There is no blazer that has not gone through the flames of iron or the heat of iron. You are going to have to iron every single thing down, because you want this to be placed in such a way, in a particular way. So the main focus of your ironing after you've ironed the body is your collar and the lapel area. This is where you are going to define your lapel. So I ended up not putting my button on the bust points, the under bust and the waistline, which was like what I mapped out. I only put my button on the waistline, and that's because I'm using a very big button, like it's a very chunky mighty button, so that was enough for everything. But if you're using small buttons, make sure you can also place your buttons like the place that you mapped out, that this is button allowance on your pattern paper. So after ironing everything, you are going to fold your collar down, and you're going to fold your lapel down, and you're going to use your iron to conceal that line. So if you've concealed that line any day at all, if you wash it, like if you iron it properly, any day you wash your blazer at all, it's still going to have that folded line. So anytime you put on your blazer, you will see it folding by itself, like it's going to relax, because you've already done all the working on the ironing table right here. And this brings us to the end of this tutorial. If you learned something, if you found it useful, make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, make sure to share. And I'll see you in my next video. Do well to follow us on all our other social media platforms if you haven't yet.